who might have heard of the most valuable robbery in history. You might know that it happened in England, or that it involved a ton of gold. But I bet you've never heard of the mastermind behind the heist. So let's take you back to 1983, when 6 masked men held a bunch of guards hostage in order to get access to one of the most secure vaults in the country. But before we jump into the details, make sure you hit subscribe, so you can be the first to watch our brand new videos. Also, stick around until the end to find out how much gold was stolen and where it all is now. On November 26, 1983, 6 men wearing ski masks and wielding guns forced their way into a vault located just outside of Heathrow Airport in West London. Their plan had been meticulously rehearsed and went off without a hitch. One of the men, Brian Robinson, had worked for Brinks-Matt, the company that owned the vault, and had given the gang intel about the layout and security protocols. He also provided his accomplices with the combination to the vault door. As they made their way to the building, the group tied up the guards and doused them in petrol. They threatened to set them on fire if they didn't hand over the combination to the inner door. It wasn't just any ordinary vault, it housed some of the most valuable items belonging to Brinks-Matt clients. These included diamonds, other precious metals, and documents that would be very damaging if they fell into the wrong hands. Although the men were able to easily intimidate the guards, there was no sign of the vault anywhere. So after the gang took them to a separate room and locked them up, they decided to start searching. Blackly for the robbers, another employee of Brinks-Matt, Anthony Black, was willing to help them find what they were looking for. He led the men to a storage area and opened the vault door. Inside, the men found everything they hoped for and more. It was filled with gold bullion bars, stamped with the royal crest, and marked as property of the Bank of England. There were also several large plastic sacks filled with gold sovereigns. After loading up their getaway vehicles, the gang fled the scene. They had only gotten away with a fraction of what was available. But even so, they had stolen roughly £26 million worth of gold bars. In today's money, that would be close to £100 million. They demanded £3 million in ransom money from Brinks-Matt and gave the company 14 days to comply, or else they would hurt the employees. However, the authorities refused to negotiate with terrorists, and the fate of the hostages was uncertain. By December, the robbers were becoming impatient. They had received nothing from Brinks-Matt, and 2 of the hostages had managed to escape. Deciding that they didn't want to wait any longer, the gang reached out to Brinks-Matt and demanded that they deliver the ransom to a house in northwest London. When the Brinks-Matt executives arrived, they were confronted by the gang leader, who took them to a basement to meet the rest of the team. As soon as the men entered the room, they were tied up and gagged. The robbers also took several of the hostages' belongings, including watches and wallets. They then threw in some petrol and lit a match, warning the men that they would burn to death if they didn't get the ransom. For a moment, it seemed as though the men would really harm the hostages. But after 10 minutes, they cut the ropes and handed them water. Then they allowed the men to go free, taking only the ransom money they had brought with them. After dropping the hostages off at the airport, the robbers split up into 2 groups and drove to Antwerp in Belgium. At first, they tried to sell the gold bars to different dealers, but nobody would buy them because they weren't properly certified. Eventually, the gang met with an Italian gold dealer named Paolo, who agreed to help them launder the loot. Paolo then sold the gold to an Austrian bank called Credit & Stolt, promising to pay the men back within a year. However, he never intended to do so and pocketed the money for himself. Meanwhile, the men began to argue amongst themselves, which made it clear that someone had to be sacrificed in order for the group to get away with the heist. In the end, they decided that it would be Anthony Black, the employee who helped them locate the vault. Black was beaten and left in a shallow grave in Belgium, although his body was never recovered. When news broke about the disappearance of Anthony Black, the police became suspicious of his colleagues. They had not reported him missing and seemed awfully relaxed about the situation. A warrant was quickly issued for Brian Robinson and Mickey McAvoy, the 2 ringleaders of the gang. A European-wide manhunt ensued, but neither of them could be found. However, the jig was up when a local jeweler contacted the police after recognizing one of the men from a TV documentary about the Brinks-Matt robbery. They had tried to pawn some gold sovereigns for cash, but the jeweler had been wary and kept them in his safe. After contacting the police, the jeweler waited for the opportunity to strike and pounced when the men left the shop. He grabbed the gold and hid it in his car. When the police arrived, they found the men and arrested them. Following the arrest of the last remaining members of the gang, the search for the missing gold bars intensified. However, despite several search warrants being issued, the majority of the gold has never been recovered. It's believed that Paolo, the Italian gold dealer, melted the bars down and mixed them with copper. He then sold the resulting alloy, unaware that it was actually pure gold. Some of the gold was also used to purchase jewelry and real estate across Europe, while some of it may have been stashed away in Swiss bank accounts. With the trial finally coming to an end, Brian Robinson, the main mastermind behind the heist, tried to flee the country with his girlfriend and 3 accomplices. They were eventually caught, however, and charged with conspiracy to rob and handle stolen goods. Mickey McAvoy, the second ringleader, was convicted of handling stolen goods and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Anthony Black's family, who had been fighting for justice since his disappearance, were disappointed by the lack of justice. Only Anthony's brother received a substantial sentence, while the others walked free. In total, only about 1/3 of the stolen gold was ever recovered. Meanwhile, the rest of the valuables from the vault were returned to their owners, too. The value of the recovered gold was approximately £5 million, while the cost of replacing the remaining 2/3 amounted to the same sum. This meant that the actual financial loss to Brinks-Mat was negligible. Despite the fact that the company lost some of its reputation due to the theft, it was able to avoid paying out any compensation. Unfortunately, though, the lives of many of the people involved were irreparably damaged. Anthony Black's body was never recovered, and his family had to live with the uncertainty of what had happened to him for the rest of their lives. Meanwhile, the other hostages suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder for years afterwards. Even after receiving extensive counseling, one of them was never able to return to work. In addition to the psychological effects of the ordeal, the robbers also destroyed the man's reputation and forced him to change his name in order to avoid being recognized. After the conviction of those responsible, the judge presiding over the case acknowledged that it was one of the most audacious and well-planned robberies in the history of England. The Brinks-Mat robbery changed the way that Brinks-Mat operated and increased security measures around the world for transporting and storing valuables. What's more, the theft led to the arrests of over 100 people suspected of being involved in various crimes such as money laundering, fraud, and bribery. However, not everyone was brought to justice. Out of the 20 suspects indicted, only 7 were ultimately convicted. And the whereabouts of the majority of the gold remain a mystery to this day. It's possible that some of the stolen items were melted down and used to make fake coins, or that they were hidden in secret stashes somewhere in Europe. Others believe that the gold is still sitting in a Swiss bank vault, waiting to be claimed by its rightful owners. As for what happened to the criminals, Mickey McIvo was released from prison in 1991 and returned to his life of crime. He was arrested again in 1994 for planning to rob a payroll van and served 4 years in prison. Upon his release, Mickey moved to Spain and lived there until his death in 2012. Brian Robinson was released from prison in 1997 and changed his name to Brian Barrington. He lived quietly until his death in 2019 at the age of 61. So, do you think the missing gold will ever be found? Let us know in the comments. Also, please like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next time we uncover a real crime mystery. Thanks for watching.